Live from Million Monroe Studios in Beverly Hills, California. It's Power Hour. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in this great big world. I am your host, Million Monroe de Clifford Plantagenet, and you are listening to Power Hour. Power Hour is broadcast from Beverly Hills and Brentwood, California, all over the world and internationally. We're signed to a company called California Pictures, which is in Hollywood, California, and California Pictures is actually a former company owned by Howard Hughes. Well, and now the rest of this. Okay, sorry. Flashback for some of you who are old enough to remember that TV program. I am not even old enough to remember that TV program, but I did listen to it and all sorts of other TV shows when I studied media and film ever since high school and grade school. So, the topic that we were asked and requested to talk about tonight, and I did a poll, and some people wanted to know. They said, can you do a story about Jesus because it's Christmas time? And so I said, well, I would be honored to, because my family are all in churches and in faith. One of my grandfathers was a Catholic Monsignor. One was a Catholic pastor of the Mayflower boat. I have another one who was a Baptist preacher, one who was a Pentecostal preacher. So I have quite a few religious people in my family, and I was literally raised running the halls of different churches because of all my grandfathers. So tonight we're going to be talking about Jesus Christ and God and religion. Now, this is quite an interesting story, and I hope that I don't put some of you to sleep, because I know not everybody is into church. But let me just say this, and we'll start this by the opening, that God is real. We'll leave you with that thought for right now. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back after these messages. And we're back. Thanks for tuning in to Power Hour with your host, Million Monroe de Clifford Plantagenet. Jesus is real. Now, if you doubt that, you don't have to take my word for it. You really don't. But I'm here to tell you, as many legendary families as members as are in my family, they are all pretty darn smart. I mean, you go all the way back to King Rollo, to all the way to my great-grandfather, who was pastor of the Mayflower, to my grandfather recently, who was a pastor of a Catholic church. So let's start with the history here, just to give you an idea of how real God is. 900 AD, King Rollo the Viking came from Iceland. He's my immediate great-grandfather. This isn't just a story. He's my immediate great-grandfather. King Rollo came from Iceland. And because his father had ended up in a scenario that left King Rollo to wander around on his own. And he ended up over in Norway, and he became the king of the Vikings because he was the biggest, the best, and the strongest, and the smartest, and also the best looking. Regardless of any of those facts, what the Vikings came to know as God or their deity or their religion or their faith was what's known as the Viking symbols. There's a lot of symbolism that goes along with the Vikings, such as the Viking god Thor and a few other ones. Those were the Viking symbols. Those were the Viking deities for what they understood God to be. Okay, now mind you, they were in Norway, they were from Iceland, they were from Norway, and they were in a whole nother country. So to them, they had to put a name on God and Jesus, and those were the names that they gave them. And one of them was the Viking god Thor, and there's a few others too. So go ahead and look them up if you want. So the Vikings stood behind their religion, their beliefs, as to what they believed it was. As they started moving forward and finding, King Rollo was literally he was a very, very powerful, for what we would call today a police officer, or he was a very, very powerful military leader. He did not put up with crime. He did not put up with criminals. And he started cleaning house is exactly what he did. And that's exactly what the Vikings did. And we'll leave you with that thought for right now. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back after these messages. And we're back. Thanks for tuning in to Power Hour with your host, Amelia Monroe de Clifford Plantagenet. But we're talking about God and Jesus today. And so what happened was that the Vikings moved forward and they found these churches in other countries. And they found these people worshiping in different churches. And they started to withdraw their belongings from these churches. Thinking that they were worshiping Satan. See, they thought that they were worshiping Satan. That was Satan to them. They didn't know the difference. See, to them, God was Thor and all their other gods that they knew as God. They didn't know Jesus Christ. They didn't know God. They didn't know the cross. They didn't know the churches. They didn't have those where they were. So they started to tear them down and remove the people from those churches until one day the truth actually hit them and somebody explained it to them. It all made sense to them. Now, you want to talk about a miracle. They immediately stopped what they were doing, realized that their gods were not the right gods' names, and they were worshiping the wrong way. So they immediately stopped raiding those churches and trying to throw people out of them. Instead, became the biggest and the world's best and the world's largest fans of God and Jesus ever in United States history. And that's evidenced by the Westminster Abbey. That's evidenced by the largest churches in England and London that they built. That's right. My family, my great-grandfathers, built the largest churches in London and England. And not only that, my immediate family line is buried in Westminster Abbey. That's where all my immediate family is. There's only 57,000 people on the planet who can say that. I'm one of them. And I'm actually, to be honest, since there's 7 royal families directly leading to me, that would pretty much guarantee my entryway into Westminster Abbey myself. Then we fast forward to King Henry III. King Henry I, King Henry II, all the way up to King Henry the 7th and 8th. They all strongly believed and encouraged and led people to churches throughout history. So if you say God's not real, you have to remember all of these kings, all of these royal family members had no distractions back then. They had no television. They had no radio. They had no newspapers or magazines. They had no music. They had none of that. They were not distracted by anything, and yet all they could focus on was the earth, the people, and what's going on within the world and within the earth. And they realized and recognized very powerfully that God was real. So they started leading people to churches to follow God's footsteps and his orders and his directions and his commands. Now, do you think that all of those kings, as intelligent as they were, and all of those queens, as intelligent as they were, would tell people to go to church and follow the Bible's orders and follow the religious orders and follow the commandments if it wasn't true? All of the kings? Yes, every single one of them vouched that God was real. Every single one of them vouched that Jesus was real. Now, we'll leave you with that thought for right now. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back after these messages. And we're back. Thanks for tuning in to Power Hour with your host, Amelia Monroe de Clifford Plantagenet. I can tell you firsthand, my family does not make mistakes, and they wouldn't make it 10 times over with 10 different people. God is very real, and I'm telling you that for a fact. And hell is very real. I'm telling you that for a fact. And if you don't believe me, you're going to find out the hard way if you're living life on the opposite side of the Bible. So I'm here to try to tell you that God is real and Jesus is real. And, it's up to you. I mean, God left it up to you to decide. He very clearly stated that in all of the Bibles, all of the Qurans, and all of the different books that are written about the prophets and God and Jesus and the saints. Every single one of them, they say it very clearly. You have a choice. You can choose to follow or not. That's up to you. But you're going to be the one who pays for it at the end. So, and it really is up to you. But do you want to believe or do you not want to believe? And I'm here to tell you that my family line knows what they're talking about. They know what they're doing. They've been doing it for thousands of years. So, yes, they're very real. God is very real. Now, Christmas time is an absolute wonderful time to celebrate the life of God and life of Jesus. And, we celebrate, even though Jesus was actually born somewhere between December, I think, and they said February, between December and February or something like that. They didn't exactly have calendars back then, but they could kind of pinpoint the date and times. Christmas time is the time that we celebrate Jesus' birthday. Now, Jesus was Jewish. Yes, this is true. That's absolutely true. He was born in Jerusalem. He was a Jewish king. And he was born to a mother who was immaculately conceived. Now, do you believe that, or do you believe that's a story? She was immaculately conceived. And that's all I'm going to say about that. There is no evidence that would suggest otherwise. Now, was it a man that conceived her? How do you know that God did not use that man to conceive her? Maybe it was. Or maybe it was God himself who incepted her with a baby child. In either case, God is very real and Jesus is very real. They've even found several facts in the Bibles, such as Noah's Ark. Yes, they did find it. The Ark of the Covenant. Yes, they did find it. The Shroud of Turin that was on Jesus. Yes, they did find it. The crosses that Jesus wore. Yes, they did find it. The rocks that Jesus moved. Yes, they found it. The cave that he was buried in. Yes, they found it. They found all of those things that were outlined in the Bible. So what makes you think that the Bible is not true? I've heard some people say, oh, the Bible is just the world's greatest selling story. Is it a story? Then why is it that every single fact in those Bibles has been verified and had been found? All the artifacts they talk about have been found. They've been located. The people that were murdered, the things that were buried, the things that were here and there and that were placed in certain places throughout the Bible, every one of those facts has been verified to be true. So what would make you think that the Bible is just a story? It's absolutely true. Some people say, oh, Jesus didn't walk on water. Do you really think that they would make that up? Do you think, oh, the man was floating through space like an alien? No. He walked on water. Period. Point blank. End of story. There was no trickery back then. Jesus wasn't into tricks. He walked on water. Okay? He was the only person who's ever been able to do it, sort of. There's been other people who can kind of walk on water, which tells me that Jesus walked on water. And he knew how to do it, and he was the one who could do it, and he's the only one who could do it. I mean, I suppose if God wanted you to walk on water, you would probably be another person who could walk on water, but God doesn't want anybody to walk on water. Jesus was the only one who walked on water. Everything in the Bible has been proven to be 100% true. Time and time again. Thousands and hundreds and thousands of pastors across the planet and across the globe. Now, I was blessed with my immediate grandfather, Henry Keane, from Ireland. He was an Irish lad, and he came from Ireland when he was about 15 years old by himself, sailed across the ocean because he had a mission from God. And his mission from God was to come to America and teach people Christianity and teach people about Catholicism and teach people to follow the Bible. And he became a pastor or a priest in Los Angeles counties, San Bernardino counties, and then San Diego County, where he had his own church. And he rose to the very, very high position of a Catholic Monsignor. Yes, you can look that up. Monsignor Henry Keane. That's Keane as Keane. Was my grandfather, my immediate grandfather, who taught me a lot. He had doctorates in school and spoke 7 different languages. The man was a walking genius. He was very intelligent. Now, if you didn't know him, his Irish brogue was so thick that it might be hard to understand him. But I, having the very keen ear that I do, pardon my pun there, but having the very keen ear that I do, I was able to listen and hear everything that he said with complete perfection. I waited on my grandfather hand and foot. I cared for him. He cared for me, as well as my grandmother. He was married to King Rollo's granddaughter, my grandma Clifford. True story. So, my grandfather came from Ireland on a mission from God to marry King Rollo's granddaughter, Lois Keene. Lois Clifford was her maiden name. She married Douglas Littlefield, who was a royal person also. And then he joined the Marines and didn't make it after 1972. Then she married and found Henry Keene, the Catholic Monsignor. They fell in love. Well, naturally, it was a good choice because he had found King Rollo's great-granddaughter, Lois Clifford. So my grandma and my grandpa, who I lived with for quite some time, raised me as well. They cared for me. They nurtured me and spoiled me and spoiled me and spoiled me till no end. I went with my grandfather to churches. I went with my grandmother to work. Believe it or not, King Rollo's great-granddaughter worked at Kmart in San Diego. She worked her way up from the bottom to being a manager or a supervisor. And she did not give up there. She worked until she was almost 80-something years old at the front door when she could no longer supervise and manage the store. She worked as a front door greeter at Kmart. She loved that store. She loved people, and she loved helping people. That's what our family does. That's what King Rollo taught us. My grandfather, Henry Keene, the Catholic Monsignor, every day began with prayers and preachings, and every night ended with prayers and preachings. Each and every day was filled with fun with both of them. Both religious, both loving, both caring, both smiling and laughing and happy people. They took me to baseball games. They took me to football games. They took me out to ice cream. They took me to eat. They took me to libraries. They played video games with me. They read me stories. They showed me pictures. We shared artwork and recipes. All sorts of fun things. So if you tell me that you don't believe God or Jesus is real, then explain that one. Then we have my other step-grandfather who adopted me. Pastor Melvin Harrell in Reedley, California, was a pastor of the Full Gospel Tabernacle. Unofficially adopted me as his grandson, him and his wife, because they had lost their son, who was a friend of mine in high school, Stephen Harrell. But Pastor Melvin Harrell and I, and Millie Harrell, had a joyful engagement every single time we went to church, as did their grandson. And then when we lost him, since I was his friend, I became the surrogate grandson, which was fine. It worked for me and it worked for them. They consoled me and I consoled them. I won't explain how he passed, but let's just say it was a lunchtime episode at high school, and the truck flipped over when they were playing around in a riverbed that they shouldn't have been playing around in, four-wheeling. I spent my life growing up throughout the hallways of Full Gospel Tabernacle, which was and formerly a very, very large, gigantic college university that was converted into a church at a later point. It was a very big mission-style church, 2 stores, 2 floors, and it was the size of a castle, literally. I grew up running the halls upstairs and downstairs and going through all 100 bedrooms of that place. And I gave puppet shows and gave on performances for families and children, and I sang in the choir, and I danced, and I paraded across stage, and I gave sermons, and I was baptized and had my friends and family baptized there, including my parents, and helped with the youth ranch, and we did all sorts of fun things. We made the news at that church, and the pastor, Melvin Harrell, was actually one of the only pastors in the state of California who actually won an award for being such a great pastor that nobody could surpass him. There's actually awards for pastors, and he was one of them that received one of the highest awards in California for being a pastor, and he was my pastor. We lost him last year, and he was about 96 years old. And I was one of the last people to visit him in the hospital, and I walked in, and he was laying in a bed there, and I walked down the hallway, and there he was. And he looked up at me, and he recognized me right away. And he says, "I know who you are." I said, "I know you do." You helped raise me. And I actually sang in one of my first bands in his church. He helped me to establish singing and playing in drums. He gave me permission to sing on the microphones and inside the church, which was kind of cool. He liked my voice, and I liked his because he was a singer as well. So he was encouraging me to sing. And he actually told me at one point to sing songs against drugs. That would be a good thing to do. So I took his advice on that. So anyway, back to God and Jesus and being real. It's Christmas time. It's time to celebrate Jesus. It's time to celebrate God. And if you are a person who believes in any of the faith, you should believe. You don't have to be Christian. You can be Buddhist. You can be Muslim. You can be Hindu. You can be any nationality that you want. I mean, you can worship any faith that you want to, as long as you're giving your thanks and praise. God goes by so many different names. It's fine. You can, as long as you're in the church, or as long as you're in a synagogue or temple or whatever you call it, it's fine. God understands. Everybody's different. But one thing remains across all the boards. You must go to a place of worship and worship Him and thank Him for everything that He's done. Well, I'll leave you guys with that. And I hope that, I've helped shed some light and have hoped to shed some of the love and caring and kindness. And let's worship God and Jesus on this Christmas. So don't forget to go to church and give thanks for all your loved ones and all your family, because we all want to go to a better place when our time comes in 100 years, right? We're given 100 years on this planet. So it's up to us to what we do with it. So let's all do something wonderful and fantastic and amazing, and go to church this Christmas Eve, or if you can't go in person, worship online. Go online, log on to the website. All right, folks, guys, boys, girls, thank you very much for tuning in. This has been a great episode, and we'll talk to you very soon. We'll see you next time. Power Hour is brought to you by Million Monroe Entertainment and Marilyn Monroe Family Entertainment Companies in Beverly Hills and Brentwood, California.